in 2023. I was made a focal point on mock-up, where I had the access to investigate the level of climate education literacy in my country, Nigeria. And along the line, I was made a coordinator to oversee climate education situation in other countries of Africa. So in that very month, we had different and series of results that reveal that climate change education is just about 25% in across African education sectors. And this, to me, as a climate change education expert, to me is a sad story. So from then, I started my research on how to go deeper into revealing or impacting more, making things easier on how people will get this climate education knowledge passed to their children across different institutions at all levels. So today, I want to start by giving us an insight about what climate change education is all about. First of all, climate change education has to do with bringing different levels of academic levels together. This has to do with the primary level, the secondary, and the tertiary education system. And this has to do with a collective effort of people. Now, I've had a project where I went across schools in my region to interview teachers, to interview people who seems to be leaders in institutions, to test their knowledge and understanding about what they know about climate change. But it's so sad that most of these people, they are in the classrooms, but they don't really know much. They don't really know how to go about solving the problem or even impacting the knowledge what climate change education is all about to the students. And these people are teachers. So from there, we took up projects such as Teach the Teachers campaign, which I did with Mock-up sometime 2022, 2023. And to a reasonable extent, we've been able to impact a good percentage of my community on how to deliver a quality climate change education. So today, I want us to have this understanding. Want us to have this picture of how do we go about bringing up climate change education into our classrooms, not just our classrooms. How should we pass this knowledge about climate change to our young people? Because today, every one of us here are adults, and we are looking at passing a knowledge to the next generation. So now, how do we pass this knowledge to the next generation? We can only do this through education. Now, there is a saying that education is the best path for people starting life to tread on. That is where you learn from scratch. That is where you know how to go about what life is all about. So I'm going to delve into education. I'm going to delve into the relationship between climate change and agriculture and how we have impacted. I'm also going to delve into emissions. I'm also going to delve into climate awareness. Now, all these are areas that has to do with climate education. All these are areas where we have been that has been drafted that in our curriculum. That these are areas when you go through these areas, you should be able to make a quality climate education at every level. Now, first of all, the question is, how do we bring climate education into the classrooms? Now, first of all, you can only bring climate education into the classrooms through the teachers. Now, these are the people that impact the knowledge to our younger people, whether in the primary education, whether in the secondary or in the tertiary institution. The teachers, the lecturers, these are people responsible to pass this information. So the first set of people to be included in this curriculum, the first set of people that should be included in this lecture should be the teachers. Okay, now teaching the teachers on what climate change education means that you are impacting a whole generation. Now, the need for climate change education at every level is our individual goals. The important facts we should know about the crisis, climate change, and how we are affected by these strange occurrences. Now, what levels of damage has this climate change caused in us, in this generation? What are the possible strategies to suppressing the impacts of climate change? How do we survive in climate change crisis situations? Then from there, you delve into adaptation. How do we adapt in times of crisis? What kind of solutions do we need to adopt in these times? And lastly, in this education sector, how do we bring this knowledge to our young ones? How do we bring this knowledge to our young ones? So these are subtopics where when we giving them or impacting this knowledge to the teachers, these are subtopics that when you make them understand what these things is, what they are all about, they will have a clue on what approaches, on what levels, what approaches to use to impacting this knowledge to the young people. Now, from there, I'm going to go into climate awareness. Now, when we say climate awareness, about making people. Sorry, I had an interruption. From there. So as I continue, creating awareness, it means bringing people together, making them understand what climate change is all about, giving them significant approaches to fighting climate change. Now, this is bringing out your voices. For example, in my community, I am among the few young people who has deemed it fit to bring out my voice to talk about the level of climate change in my region. When I was at the event we had at Nairobi last year in Kenya at the African Climate Summit, I was among one of the speakers that highlighted the need for an improvement in the level of climate awareness across Africa and beyond. Now, this is a spot where so many of us feel that it is a fight for a particular group of people called climate advocates. But this is not true, because when you are talking about climate change, it is not a disaster that is facing just one community or one household. It has to do with, is a global crisis where you have impact in every country at every level. So it is something that when everyone is on the know, when everyone comes together to discuss, to share insights, to share about the happenings, about the crisis happening in their region, this is an awareness level that when you hear this, you should be able to know that this is the right action, this is the right approach to go on this very, very issue, on this very crisis. Now, we have different pledges on how to support victims from across around the world. Some earlier this year, Nakita was talking about our pledges being in millions when the crisis, the damages are in billions. So when you create this level of awareness, you discover that people will have understanding, people will have a clearer picture of what you are talking about, and they will know that these are the approaches on how to mitigate most of this crisis. So the level of awareness we create determines how big our community will be. As an undergraduate student then, when I was an undergraduate, along my co-founder, we began Grit to Green as just 4 students, telling them about what climate change is all about. But based on the level of awareness we've created, Today, we have over 1,000 members across different parts of Africa and Europe. This is the power of creating awareness. So, in climate change education, in bringing this curriculum to the teachers, in making them understand that this is a demand, this is a necessity, we cannot do without creating awareness, because it is through the awareness we create that teachers we understand, teachers we take it upon themselves that this is a fight that is meant for every one of us, and we should have every reason to go deeper into it and learn more about climate change. And with this, it will be a good reason for our younger people coming up to want to delve into courses that has to do with climate change. They want to delve into researches that has to do with climate change. And this is one of the best parts of climate change education. So that being said, I want to go into the relationship between climate change, awareness, and agriculture. Now, we cannot talk about climate change without talking about agriculture, because this is where our food comes from. Now, in the process of bringing in climate change into our class curriculums, there is rooms for us to picture the place of climate change into every part of career, every discipline, because there is always a place for climate change in every discipline. In one of my researches I did last year, I was able to integrate the place of climate change in mathematics. Okay, now how do I do this? I was having a research that has to do with carbon emissions, carbon credits, and I had to make a derivation that could connect me from my basic mathematics to the need of bringing climate change into mathematics. So the research made me to understand that there is a place of climate change education in every aspect, in every discipline anyone can find themselves. So now, talking about climate change and agriculture, the food we eat is a product of agriculture. So when we say climate change is a threat to our life, it's cut across different sectors, such as food, such as health, such as water, such as economy, and our general well-being. So we depend on agricultural products to survive, but climate change is one major factor that affects agriculture, not just affecting the crops, but affecting the soil and the weather conditions. So these are relationships, these are connections between climate change and agriculture. So when you're talking about taking this to the classrooms, teachers should be aware of these relationships. These are the only reasons, these are the only ways where teachers can understand how to go about impacting this knowledge to the younger generation. So quickly, I want to go into emissions. So we have continuously talked about the increase of emissions. We have continually talked about global emission, and still it has kept on rising. The emissions from fossil fuel, oil and gas industries, automobile industries, manufacturing companies, food production plants, and the rest of them. All these are major contributors of global emission. And today, if you're taking climate change into the classroom,
the greatest fear in the world is the opinion of others. And the moment you're unafraid of the crowd, you are no longer sheep.
Correction. I told you I'm really on the way back from work, so I've not really gotten to my house. So as I proceed, so talking about emission, the oil and gas industries, automobile industries, manufacturing companies, food production plants, and the rest of these are major contributors to the climate change. So talking about climate education, you have to bring this to the classroom. You have to make the students to understand that these are one of the things that contributes to this crisis. So when they are doing their researches, they will know how to go about these processes, and they will know the level of research that should be done to mitigate most of these things. And we have tried in policies. We have tried to go through agencies. We have tried to go through government representatives to introduce climate education. But most of the times, our efforts ends up not being enough for these people to see reasons. So sorry for the interruption. So most of the times, our efforts are not enough for these people to see reasons to include climate change education into the curriculum. But as we all know, it is a responsibility. It is our collective responsibility to do the right thing, to include these things through whichever means we can. Now, the choice of introducing climate education will build a total new hope for today and the generations unborn, because this is a transgenerational solution which makes a sustainable solution. From this webinar, I've been able to give us a major insight on how to include climate change education into the classroom, the relationships between the students and climate change stories. So I'm going to stop here. So we could take questions at this time. Thank you so very much. I appreciate for listening. So I'll be open for questions at this time. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you very much, Theophilus. For the participants currently on the call, if you have any questions for Theophilus, kindly send into the chat box. But before then, I'm just going to go through the predetermined questions that have been set by the host organization for all sessions. So I'm going to go first with what are the best practices for integrating climate change topic into existing school curricula? So they're not just starting all over from scratch, into existing school curricula. What are the best practices for integrating climate change topics? All right, over to you, Theophilus.
The cost of our research in the course of our research, we've come across situations like this where we visited a school and the principal, the head of the institution, was asking us, so do we expect them to integrate our curriculum into their already existing curriculum? So it is very simple. For every subject, for every course, there's always a relationship. There's always an interrelationship between climate change and every course. For example, you talk about biodiversity. You're talking about every species surviving in the environment. Now, when you talk about biodiversity, you see that there are you talk about different species. You're talking about plants. Talking about animals. Sorry for the interruption. So from there, you understand that there is a place for climate change. For example, in mathematics, when you're making your calculations, you will discover that there are places where you have to integrate some theories. Now, those theories cannot come from any other place apart from what you already have as a connection, as the interrelation. For example, let me use political science, for example. Now, you have our policymakers. These are people that make policies on behalf of of you and I, on behalf of people they are governed. So now integrating climate change into these policies has to do with our basic laws, our basic principles. So for every subject, there should be always a place where you can include the climate change topic as an extramural lecture included to a particular course, to a particular discipline. All right. So these are one of the measures that we were able to use to convince the proprietors or the head of schools where we got into to include climate change. So some schools they were able to adopt climate change education into uh, each each subject with extra hours of teaching. Now, these extra hours of lectures was made possible because of the inclusion of climate change education. So we can include climate change education in every discipline if we succeed in making these things a policy. When we succeed that there is need, there is demand. For example, you're talking about plastic pollution, you're talking about how to recycle, you're talking about reduction, you're talking about reusing. Now, these are environmental sustainability practices that is included in every environmental courses. All right. So these are subjects, these are disciplines that has to do with you and I practicing our day-to-day life. So it won't be a different or a difficult case on how to adopt these practices. So adopting these practices is automatically including climate change education into the curriculums. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Theophilus. I would also love to share concerning um, climate education, include integration into the school curricula. Um, there's a speaker we also reached out to from Eco Champions. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Temilade Salami, where she's also a co global ambassador for their world. What she does is she creates just like a storybook, just like how I mentioned during the opening session of cartoons for early childhood development. She creates or writes a storybook about climate awareness, about climate change, and gives it and give the all of the storybooks just like normal storybook of that children are familiar with, but this is climate education storybooks where young people are getting to know about climate change even from an early age. So this is just one of the strategies we can also adopt, because I believe because of our audience, we have most of them are CEOs and executive directors, so we must ensure that what we are giving are not just knowledge dependent but also practical actions. So we can also ensure that we reach out to schools within our local communities and partner with other organizations within your local communities beyond this international partnership and collaboration for knowledge sharing. You can partner with local NGOs, local youth organizations within your community for local actions. Because aside all of this international collaboration, joint force, you will be having the global youth statement coming out soon for COP29. So aside all of this, you can start taking actions from your local space by collaboration. So reaching out to schools that would love to see how we can share some practices with your educators across all levels, how they can integrate climate change into all disciplines. So yeah, before we move to the next session, I believe we have about a few minutes left, about 5 to 7 minutes before Jacob would comment. I would just love to ask this one more question, and then we'll hand over to Jacob. Um, I also believe you're part of UNFCCC Yongo. Yeah, I believe so. And that
Yes.
means we would have worked together unknowingly. I don't know. And so I would love to ask, um, can you share like what resources are most needed to support climate education in schools? What resource? We've found some of our discussion have talked about this, but can you just make it specific in the next 2 3 minutes So we get something more tangible. All right.
Now, one of the most important resource to is the design curriculum. Like personally, I have a design 2021, being able to have shared this curriculum to over 15 institutions, secondary institutions, and this has really helped them to understand what for me, one of the basic things that we can use as a tool to support climate change education in schools is when you give them curriculum. Now, giving them this curriculum means that you have given them a platform, a foundation where they are going to start from, because these are researches and these are things, these are based on our experience, based on our researches, and these are the only tool that these teachers has to impact on these students. So when you are able, when you want to make an effective climate change education section, you must come up with a material curriculum. Now, these are step by steps. These are different approaches in which people can understand in a simple terms what climate change is all about. Now, these materials also has to do with some line of storytellings, some line of practical illustrations. Now, these are parts of this curriculum because you cannot do climate change education without practical illustrations, because most of the things we do, our actions are all practical. So it is more interesting, more beneficial when we indulge in active climate education classes than passive. Okay, so these are one of the major points that if you want to get an impactful climate change education section, you must come up with a curriculum and you must be on an actionable, practical illustrations before you can get it right. Thank you so much.
All right. So, do we have any questions from the delegates currently on this call that would love to just share one or few things? Either make a comment concerning the session three, um, climate education inclusion in school curricula. Would any of the delegates or executive directors on this call make any comment concerning this session before we hand over to session four, moderator? All right, I see someone, Esther Joyrell. Yeah, over to you. You can just kindly unmute yourself and also turn on your camera.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. You can proceed.
Okay. So just to add a bit on integrating the climate curricula in the students program, what I'd say is that we need this curriculum needs policies from the top people in the government. For example, they are the people who can integrate and make it a policy for schools to integrate this curricula in their studies. If they do not do that, then it would be hard to raise this awareness and make this curricula benefit everyone. So it's also up to us. We need to push these top leaders so that they can make and implement policies that will be of effectiveness to the student curricula. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Theophilus, do you have any final comments for session three, or do we have any final question?
Oh yes. Thank you so much, Esther, for that. Talking about policymakers' approval of our curriculum, yes, you cannot really pass a bill of climate change inclusion into curriculums without the policymakers' knowledge. Now, back here in my country, Nigeria, I was able to meet with the Minister of Education sometime back in 2021 with the design curriculums for this climate education. And a couple of times it was difficult for me to have this access. But when I got a letter from Mockup, my organization, I was able to have this access. And when I had a chat with the minister, she saw reasons to adopt the climate change education into the curriculum. So before I proceeded to these institutions, I had an approval. So, but it is usually difficult for you to have access to ministers in most countries in Africa. So it's really by grace, or you have to be connected before you can have access to these people to approve whatever you have to give. So that is one of the challenges we had in including the climate change curriculum into the education system in my country.
All right. Thank you very much, Theophilus. Before we wrap up session three, I just want to make one final comment. So concerning writing to policymakers and ministers specifically, I think the MEI Foundation had something similar to this last year. We wanted to write to the ministers in the West Africa region concerning the World Health Summit, uh, calling for primary healthcare accessibility to more vulnerable communities. And what I believe group of organizations, just like how we have currently for climate action and education forum, can do is hundreds of organizations, 500 of organizations, 1,000 youth organization coming together, writing a letter to all of these people. They will definitely respond, just like how we do for the Global Youth Statement, where we have tens of thousands of youth activists writing for the UNFCCC COP statement. So what we can do really, that specifically for African countries having issues on getting ministers involved, getting ministries of education or ministries of environment involved, we can bring a coalition of networks of youth organizations and call for action, just like what we are doing. Also, we are trying to achieve also for the hashtag 30,000 um hashtag 30,000 action, where we are also tagging them through our social media spaces. So just keep on like pushing, networking, and collaborating with other organizations. And we believe we can truly include climate education to extremely for global south, because this is still lacking in global south curricula. We believe we can achieve this. So I believe we've settled session three justly. And if we have any other question, I believe there's still one more session after session four, where we can also take like a final closing remark for day one, where we can also still address if there are any comments. So thank you very much, Theophilus, again, and thank you for everyone that's still on the call. And now I believe session four can proceed now. Over to you, Jacob Moronge. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Cheers, guys.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity.